Yesterday, we were sharing about man's double nature. There is a short poem of Sri Aurobindo, A Tree, where he compares the human being to a tree. A tree besides the sandy river beach, holding its topmost boughs to the skies, like fingers to the heaven they cannot reach. This is the soul of man, his body and earth, hungry for earth, his body and brain hungry for earth, his heavenly flight detain. There is within man a constant pull in two directions. Till man comes, there is no problem. When a goat is being taken for sacrifice, she is munching grass and she does not feel any suffering except for that moment when she will be killed. Man, even while he is being taken for eating grass and not for sacrifice, for a party, he is worried, what may happen next? What may happen next? With the mind comes a sense of uncertainty. With the mind comes an awareness of ignorance, and that becomes a problem in its own right. And the pull in different directions, because man is not just an enigma, he is meant to work out something, or rather through man something is being worked out for earth. In man, the inconscient whispers and the superconscient also visits him, sometimes in his sleep or in deep moments. And that creates the confused image on the surface of man's fate. He seems to make one choice. What he gets is something totally contrary to what he has asked for from life. And one wonders, what is all this about? Why it is and wherefore it is from? This life of man is very beautiful, described in several places in Savitri, which would show how closely Sri Aurobindo knows us. And we'll just read a little bit from some passages. This is page 478. Savitri sits and looks at the cosmic past. And what does she discover? The secret of man, what really man is. We think we make choices, and we are told that because of your choices, you suffer the consequences. Right down the line, the great ones have been telling us, you are responsible for what you have done. And therefore, if you are born in a rich family, you must have donated a lot of money in your previous life. Though we don't know whether being born a rich is truly a blessing or a curse. And if you don't have 2 square meals to eat, you must have done a lot of sins, and it's the result of your sins. And out of that sin is born a Kabir, born in a poor family, yet strives towards the divine and realizes him. And so with Christ, born in a stable, realizes the very highest that man can. So this is the strange paradox, and we hold man too much responsible for everything, and there is a responsibility of man. Sri Aurobindo will tell us what really is his responsibility. But to begin with, what is the full picture of man? On the surface we see that we have made a choice and there are consequences. But who makes the choice and what really we are? Page 478. A conscious soul in the inconscious world. Man is a conscious soul. He is a spark of the divine lost in matter script. He enters into this world, and as he enters, by the very fact he enters into this sphere of sorrow, he partakes something of this, its nature. We have very beautiful passage when Narada visits the halls of Madra and comes to meet King Ashupati. He starts chanting the name of Vishnu as he comes down, but as he enters the sphere of earth, he no more sings of the immortal ecstasy, and all his music assumes a sadder note. He who had arrived at the seat of the immortals, the man divine, he begins to sing of sorrow and suffering. There is a pathos in his voice, and as he sings, the demons weep in joy, for they know that their end is near, and the self-imposed doom they had chosen upon themselves. There is a work they were doing to make this earth ready. Now that is going to come to an end. The moment one enters into this world, one enters into a house built by inconscience. In fact, as the mother would tell us, by the very fact that we eat food, we absorb a certain degree of inconscience. Of course, a lot of emphasis nowadays is being laid on this food or that food. Take milk or don't take milk, take this or don't take this. But whatever we take, we must not forget, it's created out of this mud of earth. The very body that we assume has been built by a constant pressure of light, extracting consciousness out of inconscient. So a whole lot of workings of the body are unconscious. We are unconscious of that with which we most closely identify ourselves. This is the state of affairs. Only when somebody is gone, that is the time we say he is gone, simply because his body is lying dead. But that's not what we are. We are a conscious soul in the inconscience world. This world is created. This is the first secret, that this everything here is as if under the siege and reign of inconscient, and this wants to prolong its reign ceaselessly, endlessly. That is its habit, that's its nature, that is the resistance within it. It would not allow. And if the spiritual fire dares to blaze high, it clamps it from all sides. If we jump a few feet, we don't have to meet much resistance. But if it really try to escape the gravitation of the earth, we have to really get some rocket with special propellants which can really catapult us far and high. This is the difficulty, and each time we try to strive to go beyond the frames which inconscient has set for man, thus far and no further. These are your safe limits. It suddenly comes and clamps and would not allow us to go further. Even in our inner seekings, in Savitri, in Book 2, Canto 2, not on this page which we have opened, when Sri Aurobindo speaks of the issue, he describes so beautifully, an absolute supernatural darkness falls on man sometimes when his soul draws near to God. An hour comes when fail all nature's means. It would not allow. What is this supernatural darkness? There is a natural darkness in which we live. That is natural to us. We don't feel it is darkness. We live surrounded by shadows and we call it light. And there is a supernatural darkness. You try to escape, the entire forces of ignorance and darkness, they come and clamp us from every side. And at that time, nothing helps except the strength of the soul. We'll just read it for a while and then come back to this page. Well, it's a very powerful and so true. This is on page 11. An absolute supernatural darkness falls on man sometimes when he draws near to God. An hour arrives when fail all nature's means, forced out from the protecting ignorance, and flung back on his naked primal need, he at length must cast from him his surface soul and be the ungarbed entity within. That hour had fallen now on Savitri. We would normally say that, oh, what a bad fate. God must be cruel. And we are reminded of a nice story from the Mahabharata. Draupadi, she is the born of fire. She is none else but an Ansh avatar of Kali, the great goddess who slays. And she is married to 5 men who are the strongest at that point of time, in this side of the world at least. And she is lost in a game of dice. And she calls for help. She turns to the blind king. He helps him not. She turns to the great Drona and Bhishma, immortal, and they don't list heed to her. She turns to the 5 husbands, each one capable of slaying all of them, but none can get up and help her. And then she turns to God and calls God by 100 names, and God comes not. And then in a moment, suddenly she calls, and lo and behold, the divine appears. And that becomes a moment of great blessing for her. She asks later on, why you took such a long time to come? She says, look, Draupadi, you were calling this or that person for help, and all your life they have helped you. This time I wanted to teach you who is the real help. So, but I called you by 100 names and you didn't come? Yes, of course, you called me from very far, O thou who dwellest in the skies above. To come to earth is not an easy task. O thou who art in the upper hemisphere, it's still a long journey, and so on and so forth. But when you addressed me as O thou who art seated in the lotus of my heart, there I came. That hour had now fallen on Savitri. So it's difficult to say from appearances in life what is a boon and what is a curse. Perhaps whether we say boon or curse, reward or punishment, they are all our mind's evaluation. We evaluate one way and we say it's a curse. We look at it from another stance and it turns into a boon. And we see that so many times in so many stories, every curse that a rishi has given is actually a boon. Even when he curses Indra to come down on earth, it's a boon. Everything, it's the way we look at it. But the mind gives value judgments. This is good, this is bad. Oh, God is very kind upon him. He has been rewarded and he has got a kingdom. That's how Karna must have thought when Duryodhana suddenly gave him a kingdom. He must have thought, God's grace. What a wonderful opportunity. Look at it. God is so merciful. And if that time he was not given the kingdom, maybe he would have been fighting under the banner of the Lord himself. So we don't know in this world. A point she had reached where life must be in vain, or in her unborn element awake, her will must cancel her body's destiny. As we were speaking yesterday, there are 2 kinds of destiny that comes to us. The destiny of the soul and the destiny of the embodied nature. This is created by inconscient, and all the time inconscient has its great hold upon it. Whereas the soul is something which descends from above into this dark inconscient world. And even though for a long time it is a sleeping infant, yet it shares the nature of the wonderful. And therefore it uses all experience to grow Godward, to grow Godward. For only the unborn Spirit's timeless power can lift the yoke imposed by birth in time. This yoke also has a purpose. It is like a challenge given to us. What is the challenge? Can you cancel this destiny? Can you go beyond these limitations? Can you recreate life closer to what our heart truly wishes it to be? A life that is truly beautiful, a life that is perfect, a life where we can say is really worthy of the indwelling Godhead. Can we really do that? This is the challenge. And there is something in us which can do that. And we bring that with us. Only the self that builds this figure of self can raise the fixed interminable line that joins these changing names, these numberless lives, these new oblivious personalities, and keep still lurking in our conscious acts the trail of old forgotten thoughts and deeds. So much of complexity that is there in man's nature. There is a surface life where we seem to choose and act. Behind him are cosmic forces at war. The Titan, the Fury, the gods, the Jinn. And still behind, he has the legacy, the stamp of heredity, his own buried selves, the whole collective consciousness of the earth, which he inherits as soon as he enters the globe. And how small of us that we keep blaming people, keep judging them, they are good and bad, as if man was consulted when this universe was created. Sri Aurobindo would tell us. So much for man's choice. So we can come back to page 478. How beautifully he has seen us, hidden behind our thoughts and hopes and dreams, an indifferent master signing nature's acts. This is the only thing given to man. At another place, he would say, in one of the experiences of Savitri, man is a dynamo for God's works. Nature does most in him, God the high rest. Only his soul's consent is his own. This is the symbol of the story of Arjuna and Krishna. Krishna says, you say yes or no, that you can decide. I have decided what I have to do. In fact, I have done it. If you want to be my instrument, very fine. If you don't want to be my instrument, set aside. I am not dependent on you. You are dependent on me. So, all that our soul does, and that is not just all that, it signs. And for a long time, it is like the rubber stamp president who cannot return the bill back to the parliament more than once. It has to sign, otherwise abdicate, go back, no second tenure. So when we refuse to sign, the entire fury of nature, you don't want to sign. You mean you want to create some godlike life here? You don't want to listen to inconscient? You who are waves on inconscient seas, as he would tell us in one of the poems, God's labor. You want to talk of heavenly peace and bringing down heavens and to create this world anew? Come, I'll show you what you are going to have. And we are besieged by an absolute supernatural darkness falls on man sometimes when he draws near to God. And we would say, oh my God, what has happened to us? I was so happy I turned towards the divine and I was so, now just a few more steps and I am going to have beautiful, blissful experiences. And what is it? Where is the beauty and the bliss of that first touch to which we woke up? Where is the master's call? Where is the lover's flute? We are surrounded by a sea of problems. And here is what hides behind. As long as we are an indifferent master signing nature's acts in our usual life, the soul consents. All right. Nature says, go down into the abyss. All right. It knows itself immortal. It has all eternity to waste. Fine. It's a sleeping child. But when the child grows up, it says, my God, this is my kingdom and how it is run. And it says, this is not the way to run it. And it begins to call its ministers and says, come here, report to me. What are you doing? And he says, oh my God, this fellow is trying to claim the kingdom. We are going to banish him. Thus, nature tries to banish, or the inconscient tries to banish the soul repeatedly through the back door of death, as child Krishna is banished from Mathura. And for a long time, they grow in two parallel states. Mathura, symbolic of our outer nature, is governed by Kansa, the ego. And Vrindavan, symbolic of our psychic state, is governed by beautiful gopis and gop, which are bringer of light and joy in the atmosphere. And when we are there, then we feel so nice, so beautiful. And then we have to go and give the tax. You know, all the people in Vrindavan were carrying cheese and butter and give as tax to Kansa. So then we experience all that hell. And again we come and go. This is the back and forth journey. For a long time it goes on. But now, in the beginning, it's an indifferent master signing nature's acts. Leaves the vicegerent mind a seeming king. Mind is itself a creation of nature. And it thinks I will find what is the secret of nature. And Sri Aurobindo would tell us, when most it masters, then it is most its slave. When mind tries to gather the secrets of nature, as it has done today, it says, I will read your book. What is the book of nature? Oh, matter has these powers. I will harness them to my use. And he creates a whole world which is so beautiful to look at. And then what happens? Nature says, all right, master me. And when the mind says, I have mastered you, I have mastered the forces of matter, I have mastered the forces of life, we have still to enter into that phase. I have mastered even the forces of mind. And then nature says, now I have trapped you most. Now you cannot even move out of this prison house of air-conditioned environment. You cannot drink any other water except Bisleri. Till one day I will tell you that this too has lot of pesticides in it. And then you won't know what you were drinking all these years. When most it thinks itself master, then most it becomes its slave. That is how it plays with the mind. So mind is left a seeming king. In his floating house upon the sea of time, the regent sits at work and never rests. He is a puppet of the dance of time. Mind itself is a puppet of the dance of time. Thoughts arise in us, feeling arise in us, will, impulses, desires. Every sense is like a postman knock. That is how he'll describe. And we respond to every touch and call. And we call ourselves autonomous, free. I choose, I decide. And who is this I but a puppet of time? He is driven by the hours, the moment's call compels him with the thronging of life's need and the babble of the voices of the world. The mother would tell us, when we are in that stage, we are like a cork upon the sea. One wave comes and we are driven there. Another wave comes, we are back to the same place. And we are tossed from one place to another, back and forth. And we think we are moving. And we are moving in a circle which sums up to naught. Not quite, maybe 0.01, but more or less a naught. This mind no silence knows, nor dreamless sleep. In the incessant circling of its steps, thoughts tread forever. Through the listening brain, it toys like a machine and cannot stop. We can go on to the next page because long passage, and read somewhere in the middle. What all the mind does. Page 479. Adventuring into infinite mind space, he unfolds his wings of thought in inner air, or traveling in imagination's car, crosses the globe, journeys beneath the stars, to subtle worlds takes his ethereal course, visits the gods on life's miraculous peaks, communicates with heaven, tampers with hell. Same day, same mind takes a flight from here to heaven in imagination's car. And oh, very beautiful. Few hours gone, and there is a crash, and we hear the roar of hell around us, and we wonder, morning I had such a nice aspiration, I went to Samadhi and prayed, and by evening I am the most miserable poor fellow, back to the same. And then inconscient whispers into our ears, so you think you can change? Never can you change. And if we hear it too long, then it would say, 20 years you have tried and you have not changed. You think you can really change? Look around yourself. Look around. Nobody has ever changed. And then if we listen to its voice, it drags us still down and says, forget all this. This is dream. This is Shimra's head. At that time we should remember, calm eyes divine regard the human scene. But there is a guardian power. There are hands that save. There is a grace which is constantly working to lift us up. But now we have communicates with heaven, tampers with hell. This is the little surface of man's life. In the last line, man in the world's life works out the dreams of God. This is his real work. But all is there, even God's opposites. He is a little front of nature's works, a thinking outline of a cryptic force. All she reveals in him, that is in her. Her glories walk in him, and her darknesses. Man's house of life holds not the gods alone. There are occult shadows, there are tenebrous powers, inhabitants of life's ominous nether rooms, a shadowy world's stupendous denizens, a careless guardian of his nature's powers. Man harbors dangerous forces in his house, the Titan and the Fury and the Jinn lie bound in the subconscious cavern pit, and the beast grovels in his anteden. So, somebody asked Mother that when I came here, it was so nice, and after a few years, I have begun to see defects everywhere. She says, my child, go a little deeper. Suddenly, all these casements, we are asleep within us. Before we take to inner life, we are so happy because we have such a fine image of ourselves. We are so nice. Everybody is so bad to us. See, we are so sensitive, so good. I have done only good to everybody. But everybody around me is selfish. I am the only one who is good. And look what God has done to me. Why this has happened to me? And then we go to a holy man, and he'll say, don't worry, you are very nice, but these are result of some past karmas. So we bear it quietly. But when we take to inner life, not only do the upper regions open, not only do we have beautiful experiences of light, moments of respite from this world of pain and sorrow and fatigue and fall, we have those moments where we glimpse a little of that beauty wonderful, when we are touched and uplifted to something which is our most intimate self, and yet we do not recognize it here. But we also see the beast who growls in the ant den, and sometimes the furies are let loose, and we see behind the little front of man a whole cosmic world acting upon us, pressing upon us, wanting to manifest and express. And then we realize what it means really when we say we want to be God's instruments. This instrument for millions of years has been used by careless powers who use it as a puppet and throw it aside. This is what they have been doing. And that's why when we read Savitri's description, who is she? And then we go back to what we are, then we'll see the difference. On page 17 we have, who is she who comes to take the challenge? Page 17, 1-7. What is the issue for which we have come, and what it requires? A heart of steel, or maybe the heart of a child. Two things which can take us through. There is a darkness in terrestrial things that will not suffer long too glad a note. Speak about the divine, speak about the beauty inside. Something around us, something within us will not suffer it. Look at Sri Aurobindo's beautiful expression. To that part, in the very first canto we had this suggestion that inconscient feels the touch of light as a teasing, as a disturbance, as a trouble. Like a mother waking up the child. Come child, wake up. No mama, please. 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes. That 5 more minutes becomes 50 minutes. So we say, don't wake us now. We are very fine, happy. Why you are disturbing us with this constant aspire constantly? No, we should not read all this. So it keeps waking us. And that will not suffer long too glad a note, on her too closed the inescapable hand. Whose hand is this? Sri Aurobindo with the characteristic beauty describes, on her too close the inescapable hand, the armed immortal bore the snare of time. One dealt with her who meets the burdened great. Repeatedly this theme comes. Who is this one? It is none else but the one wearing the mask of death, the immortal one who comes to tease us, to challenge us, to make us fit and ready for his work. But now he comes wearing the mask of the ordeal, assigner of the ordeal and the path, who chooses in this holocaust of the soul death, fall and sorrow as the spirit's goads. The dubious Godhead with his torch of pain lit up the chasm of the unfinished world, and called her to fill with her vast self the abyss. What does he do? He says, oh, you had very nice experiences, very beautiful. Okay, come, I'll show you where the light needs to go. And with one hammer, it breaks open the gulfs. And we see, my God, this too is there in me. The mother speaks about the censors which keep coming and pointing to us. This is left undone, this is left undone, this is left undone. Mother says, actually they are an instrument of sincerity. And they are there to point out all that is still imperfect in us. All pain is a pointer of imperfection of joy. But the mistake they make, what makes them adverse forces, is that they don't believe in grace. So while they point out all the errors and mistakes, they won't let us believe that there is grace which can efface all the errors. and at every moment make life anew. Mother would tell us, my child, if you have faith that the divine grace will come and lift you out, it will come 1,000 times and lift you out. So this is what they do not tell us. They would only show us all this. So this comes and shows us. And he too is a Godhead, the dubious Godhead. Heightening, and we will read after this what this Godhead is when Savitri rips through his mask. The dubious Godhead with his torch of pain lit up the chasm of the unfinished world and called her to fill with her vast self the abyss. August and pitiless in his calm outlook, heightening the eternal's dreadful strategy, he measured the difficulty with the might. The greater the difficulty, let us not belittle ourselves or anyone else by saying, he must be a great sinner, that's why he is facing this difficulty. When God creates hell, as Sri Aurobindo would tell us, he makes it out of love. For there is nothing else that he does but loves. It is a shortcut. It is to make us grow strong. And there too we must feel the clasp of the Divine Beloved. He measured the difficulty with the might. Again we fall back to the story of the Pandavas and the Kauravas. The Kauravas had the, if you may use the modern term, gala time throughout. Born in a palace, lived in a palace, cheated everybody, usurped the palaces, died in a palace. They must have got a royal funeral, sure, with 21 guns or whatever, those arrows. But Pandavas, born in the forest, banished again to the forest. They build a Indraprasth, again thrown into the forest. They win after a gory war, then they feel changed and they feel, no, we want to go to the forest. They die incognito in the forest. Were they great sinners? Or was it someone testing their might, a signer of the ordeal on the path, who walked with them as their friend and mate, Krishna the divine charioteer, who was also hiding behind the mask and testing their strength. Come Arjuna, I will pit you against Karna. Let's see how you face the challenge. And this is really a beautiful story that when the arrows are flitting past, and every time Arjuna pushes Karna 300 yards by the power of his missiles, Krishna keeps quiet. Okay, Arjuna looks towards him for approval, but Krishna keeps quiet. And every time Karna's missile hits Arjuna's chariot, and it is just pushed a few feet behind, Krishna says, wonderful, truly remarkable. So Arjuna says, what is this? Tell me, whose side are you? You don't encourage me at all? You are encouraging him? Don't you see? I push him so much more behind. So Krishna says, no, you won't understand. I'll tell you at the end of the war. You fight. Don't get into debates, discussions, philosophy. This is no time for all this. You fight. Whatever I say out of a deep vision of truth. So the war is over. Arjuna has this question. So war is over and they have to come out. So the custom was that first the charioteer will step out and then he will say, you come down. So Krishna says, no, Arjuna, we are going to change the rule because I have always broken rules and I love to change rules. So you please get down first, then I will come down. So Arjuna says, how can we do that? You may break rules, but I am a absolutely strict follower of rules. I have learnt that you should be non-violent. I had read nice book by Gandhiji, so I didn't want to fight. Now you have changed my whole philosophy. But don't ask me to change everything. See, I am such a pure vegetarian even though I kill people. So Krishna says, don't talk all these small things. I am telling you, get down. So he doesn't get down. So Krishna pushes him out and then gets down. As he gets down, the whole chariot goes into flames. So Arjuna asked, what is this? I didn't understand. He said, that is the answer to your question. You know, I was sitting on your chariot holding the weight of the 3 lokas, of the 3 worlds, and yet this fellow could with his missile push it a few feet back. Is it a small achievement? And you know, against him I had pitted you, so that you can truly measure your might. He was worthy of fighting with you, and you were worthy of facing the challenge. So what does he do? Every time we meet with a difficulty, we must say, Mother, it's your grace. You think that there is in us that capacity to face it and go through it. Heightening the Eternal's dreadful strategy, he measured the difficulty with the might and dug more deep the gulf that all must cross. So this is what he does for Savitri. But how does Savitri face it? Assailing her divinest elements, he made her heart kin to the striving human heart and forced her strength to its appointed road. Otherwise, she could easily just merge into the absolute. For this she had accepted mortal breath. To wrestle with the shadow she had come, and must confront the riddle of man's birth and life's brief struggle in dumb matter's night. Whether to bear with ignorance and death, or hew the ways of immortality, to win or lose the godlike game for man, was her soul's issue thrown with destiny's dice. What is that game? What does it mean to hew the ways of immortality? We shall talk about after the break. But last 5-6 lines and then we'll go for the break. Here was no fabric of terrestrial make. Savitri is being described. Here was no fabric of terrestrial make, fit for a day's use by busy, careless powers. This is where we had stopped, that what has been so far the story of earth. Man has been used, or matter has been used by busy, careless powers, used as toys, as an entertainment, and then flung apart and broken. Mother has given these stories of that gambler of Monte Carlo who used to hear voices. It's very dangerous sometimes to hear voices and say, I hear voices. It's not always the sign of something very divine. And he used to hear voices, and the voices would tell him accurately what you should put your stake on, and he would win. And they were playing with him. And one day they asked him, put all of your money onto the stake. And he put everything on stake and he lost. And then the voice said, now you shoot yourself. And he shot himself. Fit for a day's use by busy, careless powers. And these powers have fun and go away. Or a castaway on the ocean of desire, an image fluttering on the screen of fate, half animated for a passing show like the cartoon Tom and Jerry, this is our life. Or a castaway on the ocean of desire, flung to the eddies in a ruthless sport, and tossed along the gulfs of circumstance, a creature born to bend beneath the yoke, a chattel and a plaything of time's Lord. This is the image of man. Behind him, around him, above him, below him, in his past and in his future, powers and agencies which use him as their instrument.